Welcome back, folks. Time to start another video. Now this one is much shorter than usual, and it's about something very important to the way I make boards and build things. These are 12-inch tiles, or 12-inch by 12-inch squares, or 1 foot by 1 foot squares, depending on how you like to use your measurements. And I use these as the base for most of my boards that aren't plain grass. And I think they're very important. So there's one thing I think is important to this hobby, to the way I like to play it, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. For this one, you want to take your template, which is a perfectly 12-inch by 12-inch square, and you want to draw around it on the normal foam board I use for most of the other builds I use here. And once you've drawn around it, give them a number just to bulk cut out from large sheets of foam. This is the same 5mm foam board for insulation I'm using for most stuff. And the most important part here is when you're cutting, this is when you want to try and keep your cuts as straight and as neat as possible. I suggest new blades whenever you're doing these, just to keep the edges as fine as possible, because once you're putting them down on a table next to each other, after later stages, there can be a little bit of gapping and some unevenness that causes tiles to not quite sit flush. However, you don't notice that once the rest of your terrain and other scatter is down on top. So, stage 2. Time to give these a coat of sealant paint. In this case, I'm using my textured house paint I've used for a lot of the base coating on the terrain I make. You can use whatever you like. Mod Podge is good. I've used Mod Podge in the past, it works very well. Whatever you like, choose your preference, use that. This is to just give it a layer of protection and hardness from the use and wear and tear on the tables. One thing I would say again at this point is, as you add details and paint with these big brushes, remember to do the top, wait for it to dry, turn it over, do the bottom, and then when you go around the edges, make sure to smooth out any bubbled areas, gathered areas, or blotchy areas where you put paint on, because it will affect how well the tables look in the end when the tiles are all together. Small gaps can appear around the edges when you lay them down to make big boards. Once that's done, set everything aside to dry, and then you can move on to the next stage. So stage 3, here we go. It is time for some flocking. There are areas when the texture paint that I use dry that are mostly paint and not as textured. For this, I'm going to use some straight PVA and add some fine kiln dried sand, because in the end of this tile's time, one side of it will be a desert tile and the other side will be a somewhat urban city floor tile. So for the desert side, to add some fine detail and to fill in some of the blank areas, take the sand, smash it down onto the PVA areas, and then just knock off any excess back into the tub or on a piece of paper to collect any of the off that falls when you're done, because any off casts that don't quite grip with the PVA can always go back into the tub, ready to be used onto the next piece. And once you get this one done, just set the PVA aside to dry and harden off, and then you can move on to the next stage. So stage 4, here we are, for the final parts of this tile setup and design, is dry brushing, or in some cases, depending on what type you're looking for, maybe a little bit of wet overbrushing. However you choose to do it, the option I have chosen here is you pick 3 basic colours again to go for whatever sort of terrain you're looking for. In this case, on these tiles, one half will be a desert style and one half will be an urban colouring pattern. So for this, you want to put on a dark brown, and then above the dark brown you want a layer of a tan or a beige, usually quite heavy, to lighten it up a little. And then for the sandy effect, add a dry brush of gold. It adds the slight sparkle and light refraction you get from the sand as you would see it on a desert or a beach, and it works out really nice. And again, that's one side would be finished with the dry brushing. Give each coat a chance to dry in between the colours, and then you want to flip these tiles over to get the best use out of both sides. And on the other side, for the urban style, I would suggest a dry brush again of, I've started with a lighter brown for the urban ones, a dry brush of then black, and then dry brush in certain areas of a puddling effect of a dark green, just to add some urban mess and puddle effects and ruin and decay for getting the most use out of these tiles once you make them. So when you're putting a table together, you have a choice of desert on one side and urban on the other, which all come together quite nicely when you get the finished piece. Once your dry brushing's finished, at the end of stage 4, that's really it. These pieces are done, ready for the table. They seem very simple, and they are very simple, and I think for anyone, these are a great place to start if you want to do a slightly different board build on relatively cheap budget. I think the total cost of the tiles when I made these in a batch was, for paint, foam, PVA, everything included, I would say 20 quid at most. At most for 20 quid, and you would have excess material to use on countless other projects. Well folks, that's us done for another one. As usual, there are some glamour shots at the end of them down on the table. Thanks for coming. If you like what you see, give the video a like, give us a comment if anything you think might be different. You can subscribe to the channel as well, and spread the word, tell your friends, share the video around, get as many people involved as possible. Thanks again for coming, see you next time.